wondered how to use watercolor pencils in your artwork to achieve beautiful results? Welcome to Sunlit Brushstrokes, where today I'm going to be sharing tips to help you maximize the full potential of watercolor pencils. Then I'll show you the step-by-step process that I use to color and paint this lovely peony. You can follow along with me with the same coloring page or simply take these layering techniques and apply them to your own coloring pages and artwork. Let's go ahead and get started. The first tip I have for you today is to consider the quality of your paper, or the paper that is in your coloring book or on your coloring page. I have a variety of papers we're going to test today so that I can show you just the difference that it will make and what techniques you are able to use or which ones you can't use, how much water you can apply. So you can go ahead and test the paper that your coloring book is made of by doing some of the things I do today, or go ahead and purchase a printable coloring page online that you can print at home, and you can kind of then control what kind of paper you print on based on what your printer is able to handle. These are an example of some coloring pages from my Etsy shop, but there's a lot of printable coloring pages out there that you could download and use. So let's go ahead and test. I've got a regular cheap paper. This is what I would print my cheapest things off on my computer with. It's very cheap. Then I've got cardstock, which is a 65-pound. This is the Recollections from Michaels. It's definitely a higher quality than this, and this is what I'm actually going to be using because my printer cannot handle watercolor paper. However, I know that some people's home printers can handle thicker paper, and so do what your printer can handle. I have seen someone use a Canson XL watercolor paper to print on from their home printer, so find out what your printer can handle and use the best quality there. I'm going to bring in some watercolor into the picture just for a minute so that I can do a wash on each of these papers and see how they hold up. And I'm just going to go ahead and put some water on each one and let it sit there for a minute. Okay, so I've let these sit for a minute, so I'm going to take my brush. I can already see on this cheapest paper, it's definitely rippling the most, and I can already tell it's going to be falling apart as soon as I really try and work with it. Let's just go ahead and do a little bit of spinning around on this paper, and you can already see, look, it's forming like little messy crumbs. Like the paper is definitely tearing and lifting. I kind of think about this paper as like, say if you wanted to use Kleenex for cleaning up a mess. It's doable, but it's not going to get you very far. Here's a 65-pound cardstock, and I'm going to do the same thing. You can see the same thing is happening. I'm getting little paper shreds, but it's not absorbing into the paper quite as quickly as this one did. But it is definitely not something that's going to be able to take a lot of layering or lifting, anything like that. Finally, here's our Canson XL. I'm going to add a little more paint just so you can see things better when it's clear. You can't see it. I think it is maybe lifting a little bit. The paper is actually not taking as much abuse, which is to be expected. It's a cheaper paper, but it will let you work it for a little bit longer. You could say it's maybe like a high quality paper towel in terms of cleaning up a mess. Now let's do with the arches. And if you're going to do this, do it with a brush that doesn't have the best tip in the world. Don't use a new brush. This is taking quite a bit of abuse, which is what I would expect. I do lift sometimes when I am working with arches, cold press paper, and so I know that it can take a fair amount of abuse. So you can see I've got little bubbles here, but I'm not really ripping the paper too much. It eventually will break down, but not as quickly. And this would be like a cotton rag or dishcloth when you're cleaning your kitchen. There's definitely a difference, and you want to find the best quality that you can for the project. Now, this doesn't mean you can't use a cardstock with watercolor. It just means you're gonna have to be very, very careful. I wouldn't bother with this because, as you can see, it absorbed that water way too quick and it just started falling apart way too fast. So the higher quality cardstock you can get, if your printer will handle something that's even heavier than a 65-pound, go for it. Or if your coloring book that you're using is a heavier paper, that would be great. But if your printer is able to handle a watercolor paper, I would absolutely go with that as my first choice. The second thing to consider is what kind of ink your printer is printing with. If you're using an inkjet like I am, it will be water soluble, and these lines will bleed around a little bit when we start getting them wet. So test and see with a damp brush if those lines smudge and smear around when you wet them. Now, even though I don't see a lot of smearing happening yet, I do know that my printer is an inkjet, which means that these lines could mix with my pigments and create ugly colors because this is a gray. I would avoid using colors like bright, intense yellows or oranges because those are going to end up I think, looking the worst. They kind of take on a green tone. Now the greenish tinge is most likely to happen in areas where you would apply it, where there's a lot of, say, computer ink already, because there's a lot of detail in the center of these flowers. And if you feel like things are looking green, you're gonna have to pull them a little bit more this way on the color wheel, closer to the red. And that's what we're gonna be doing. We'll be using a more neutral, warm yellow to kind of make that look less green in our work today. And one thing I do like about a coloring page that has lighter gray lines rather than black is that there is less black pigment there to kind of mingle with your watercolor. And so you're less likely to get that muddy color happening. My next tip is to use less water and to work drier, which brings us to today's medium, which is watercolor pencils. I'm excited to use these and experiment with them on the coloring page, because you can add your color and get things kind of more how you would like them, and then add the water so that you're able to achieve depth without adding too many layers. Because a big thing we want to do is limit how much water we put on, how much we're working the paper, and how many layers we apply. So let's go ahead and talk about a few techniques for these watercolor pencils. Typically, I would do this practice on a piece of watercolor paper, but I am going to go ahead and use cardstock, since that is what I will be working on. Now I'm using these Staedtler watercolor pencils today. I will leave a link in the description for them, but there are a lot of good watercolor pencils out there. So definitely look and see what you can find and experiment. Let's go ahead and divide our paper into fourths or quarters. Okay, that's not perfectly divided, but good enough. I'm gonna use a color that I'm not planning to use in my final piece, just because, again, don't want to lose the sharpness of the pencils I am planning to use. So I'm gonna go ahead in this first box, and I'm going to just make a circle and color it in. And this is a good stage where if you're wanting to do any color mixing, you can do it in this coloring stage. I'm going to go ahead and put 2 circles in this particular box. And then I'm gonna leave this side without anything to start with. So what we can do is take a damp brush, and this is one of the keys, like I said, is using less water. So there I have, now that was a little on the wet side. What I would suggest is to just dab your brush off after you've wet it so that you don't overwet your shape. This one feels like I made it gone a little bit wet. So definitely keep dabbing your brush as you do this. Right here, we're gonna start pulling our color. And by pulling, I'm gonna go ahead and wet the shape. Wow, I'm still wet. And then drag it out. Again, work as dry as you comfortably can. And then down here, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to start with light, and we are going to come up to this color and kind of drag it into our light. And you're going to see, like, my water is starting right here, and yet the color isn't pulled all the way into the water. So if you want to have a little bit more of a smooth transition with more light, you don't have to fill the whole area in with color. This one, we just pulled that paint right along. In this case, we wet the shape beside it, and then we dragged some of that pigment up into the wet section. I'm going to repeat this because I'm not sure if I quite got into the camera well enough. I'm just going to do it one more time, the same thing. I'm going to add water, and then, so I've got a wet brush. It's not too wet. And I'm going to just come in and pick up some of that paint and let it kind of just blend out, or I can even just, encourage it a little bit. But again, we don't want to overwork. So I actually like how that one turned out even better than the top one. So there we go. The next technique would be to take your paint directly off of your watercolor pencil. So I'm just going to come up with my damp brush and just grab some paint right off of the pencil tip, which is almost like taking paint right out of your palette. But it can be a handy thing to do if you feel like you don't want to use one of these techniques and yet you're using this color of pencil already in your project and you just want some little bit of paint on your paper quickly. You can directly take it off of your pencil and put it directly on your page, and it's almost like a slight wash. Now, if you have a larger area that you want to cover with a wash, we will not do this today because this is a very wet technique. This is a technique I'm going to go ahead and show you so that you can use it if you are using watercolor paper, but because I'm not using watercolor paper, I will not use this in the project, but I'm just going to show you quick. I'm going to add some water to my well along with my watercolor pencil, and I'm going to just kind of gently rub some of that pencil off the pencil and into the water. So I've got a wash, and then I could cover a larger area with it. However, I would be very cautious with doing this on cardstock because that's a ton of water and it's going to ripple a lot. The paper is going to ripple a lot. But I wanted to show you so that you would know the full potential of these watercolor pencils. Now everything's really wet, but let's just go ahead and label things really quick. I'm just going to put wash on this one. Now I can't figure out a way to abbreviate this, so I'm just going to put remove color from pencil with brush. If you have a better way to write this that helps you remember, just do that. Let's just put wet dry shape here. And you could even include damp brush if you want to. Here I'm just going to put pull with water, and I'm going to put drag with water. These are really not very technical ways of describing it. I would just say you can go ahead and write down what helps you to remember these techniques best. Which brings me to my next tip, which is to work in small areas at a time so that you're not running into the problem of, say, keeping things wet too long as you're working, which is perfect for this project because the shapes are so tiny, we can just do small pieces at a time. So to get started here, I want to discuss our colors quickly. We have three parts to these flowers. We have the center of the flower, we have the petals, and we have the leaves. So for the center of the flower, we're going to start with yellow. I'm using the same technique that I taught in my colored pencil video where I show how to layer using this kind of circular motion. On there, I also talk about gradation. If you would like to practice gradation a little bit, let's just do it at the bottom here. Just write down here. We're going to just practice a gradation. If you've already done this or you're comfortable with doing this, definitely no need to practice it, but we're going to be using it a little bit within our layers here, and that is to work from dark to light and light to dark. So I'm going to start by applying heavy pressure here. I'm going to come up to the tip of my pencil because when you're holding your pencil near the tip, you can get some pretty heavy pressure. And then I'm going to lighten off my pressure as I move this direction. And I'm going to hold further back as well so that I can get lighter, kind of a lighter pressure going on here. And then I'm going to lighten off till almost like I'm barely touching the paper, and then I'm going to pick up my pressure again and come heavier. And as I get heavier, I'm going to work my way closer to the pencil tip again. So this is not a bad thing to practice. If you've never practiced varying your pencil pressure before, that's something you're going to want to maybe take a few minutes and just practice quick. You could use any pencil, colored pencil to practice. You don't have to use a watercolor pencil by any means, but that's what we're going to be using a little bit of as we layer our colors on. And by that, I mean, I'm taking my kind of golden yellow color. I don't have names on these pencils here. And so all of these Staedtler pencils, the number starts with 125 and then dash, and then there's another number. And so when I say a number, I'm just going to be using this last number at the end, which is 16. So I'm using number 16, which is kind of a gold color, and I'm going to use light pressure. And then I'm going to increase my pressure as I work my way down this strip of yellow. And I'm going to move my hand closer to the tip of the pencil and try and create just a soft gradation here. Then I'm going to come on top of that with number 61, which is kind of our mauve color. And I'm repeating that, except that I'm not coming down this section as far, but I'm kind of going light pressure and darker pressure as I come closer to the right. And then finally, I might put a tiny bit, I don't know if I'm going to use purple or not, but I'm going to just start with the heavy pressure over here and then just lighten off pretty quickly. The purple is going to make things go muddy if you don't have enough of the purple pink color on here first. And I'll just read those numbers again. So that was 61 that I used for the purple pink or mauve, and then number 6 is our purple. And so I didn't apply very much purple at all. Now for our petals, we're going to repeat this. So I'm going to use lighter pressure this time, and I know up here I use the same pressure the whole time for the yellow. Here I'm going to use lighter pressure with the pink and then darken or apply heavier pressure. Oh, and that was number 23. Now I'm going to come in with this mauve color, and again, this was number 61, which is the same one I used earlier. And I'm going to kind of I'm not going to start at the very beginning. I'm going to start somewhere around here with lighter pressure and just work my way towards the end with heavier pressure. And then I will do the same thing with the purple, which was number 6. In my opinion, numbers and art do not belong together. And then finally, I'm going to grab number 3, which is a blue, and I'm just going to put very little bit of it at the end. And again, kind of doing a little bit of a change in pressure, so I'm heavier pressure here and lighter pressure, but I'm not applying very much. Last of all is our leaves, and I do love this color. This is number 56. It's a light olive green, and I'm going to apply it over this whole section. This one is in the set of 24 pencils. It doesn't come in the smaller set. I think it's kind of a shame that when you buy colored pencil sets, they don't have more olive greens in the like the basic one. And I know you can mix your own colors, and so you do need the more intense colors. I just think if I'm going to take a shortcut on any color when I'm doing colored pencil or watercolor pencil, and probably even paint, if I used more than 3 tubes, I would probably consider something that would help me get my greens faster, my neutral greens. But thankfully, this number 56, from what I understand, is in the 24 set. Next color I'm going to use is the number 5. And I'm not going to put much of it at the beginning of this little strip here. I'm going to pick up pressure as I work my way this direction. And then I've got a number 38. And I'm doing the same thing, just less. I'm not starting that 38 until I get closer to the end, kind of the way I did up here. And if I needed it, I could add some blue or purple, which was number 3, or the purple, which was number 6, and we can get a nice dark color. I'm going to go ahead and just cover it all again with my light olive green. So let's go ahead and apply these techniques to our coloring page. So this is the coloring page I'm going to use. This is a scripture coloring page from my Etsy shop. It also comes in a set where you can get the one without the scripture verse on it. So if you wanted to write your own verse, maybe you love to do your own hand lettering or even just handwriting, you have that option as well. There's a blank one. I actually did the lettering for this piece around 2 years ago, but it's been very relevant for me this past month. It's been a busy, kind of crazy, stressful month for me, and I have been trying to juggle this all on my own strength. So I definitely need this reminder that the Lord's grace is sufficient for me. I hope this is an encouraging reminder for you too. All right, so we're going to keep these color swatches in mind as we work. We will be going with yellow and work our way this direction for the centers. So let's do that first. I'm going to go ahead and just fill in the center, and I'm going to use medium pressure because I don't want to go too heavy. All right, now I'm coming in with my 16, and I'm going to put it pretty much everywhere. But I'm going to put heavier pressure kind of towards the outside of this little circle. Then I'll come in with our number 61, which is our mauve color. And I'm leaving the center of it so that a little bit more of the bright yellow can show. And last of all, I'm going to put a little tiny bit of the purple, which is number 6. Not very much. I think I'm going to even do a few of these kind of like, I'm using the mauve and I'm kind of just doing a little bit of like a little bit of a stripy curly motion. I'll show you what I mean on this blank piece of paper here, what I was just doing. I was kind of doing something like just these little, I don't know, some of them are like little lines, little curls, just to kind of give the impression of all these stamens. Now I'm going to go ahead with our number 23 and just fill in our petals. And you can leave some sections of them lighter. We're going to go darkest as we come to the base. And I'm going to do my coloring in the direction of the little creases within the petals, darkest at the bottom, and I'm going to flick a little bit up. In fact, to make this go faster, I'm just going to cover the whole thing first with light pressure with this pink, and then I'll come back in and do the details. I'm trying to keep my motion quite circular so that I don't get goofy lines running in weird directions. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the little bud. I'm going to leave the center though of the bud lighter. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trace some of these lines that are here. Not the outlines, but some of these petals have definite creases and folds on them or within them. Kind of like this. So I'm going to always go darkest with my pink, closest to kind of like the center of the peony. And so sometimes I'm going to be just kind of doing this kind of circular motion to fill it in. But in some cases I will do a few of these kind of like little lines. And I've showed this technique before, but I'll just show it quick on this scrap of paper again, where I'm doing some kind of flicking motion where I'm using heavier pressure and then lightening off. I'm doing this in different areas wherever I want to kind of show the little creases and folds within the petal. And so I'm going to go to one of these ones that's not colored in to show you what I'm talking about. Maybe they'd show up easier. You can see here, for instance, this is one petal, but there's some of these little creases here, or this petal here. This is kind of one petal, but there's creases here. There's some creases here, some creases there. So that's kind of what I'm trying to cover with my watercolor pencil, and some of them kind of go in interesting directions, such as this one here. Another thing to keep in mind is anytime you're working on a petal that definitely is kind of going behind some other petals, you want to darken the one that's in the back. That's going to also help you decide where to do these little lines. It's also going to help you create depth, even if you're not doing as many little lines as I'm doing. Be sure to keep a sharp pencil as you're doing this, because if your pencil gets dull, it could be a challenge to work with it. And you can even simplify, like if some of these kind of get lost and you can't see them apart anymore, that's not the end of the world. There's so many tiny ones here. Just keep in mind, start darkest at the bottom or at the base. And by bottom, I mean the bottom of all of these because they're the closest to the base of the flower. Of course, here it looks like it's the top of the petal, right? But it's really the part of the petal that's closest to the base of the flower is where it's darkest. And then as the petal moves away from the flower, it gets lighter. So you can see over on this section of the flower, it's always the lower side of each petal, but in this case, it's reversed because this petal is drooping downwards. Remember, even if you don't get every single petal looking the way that I've made mine, it's still going to be beautiful. All these tiny little petals in the middle are just going to work together to create the full beautiful bloom. Let's go ahead and do the bud. And again, these outside petals are going to be the darkest where they're closest to the base. We're changing directions. So now the outside petals are kind of curling around like this. There's a little bit of a curl on this one right here, but otherwise most of them are kind of doing this. And then the center area that's more of a ball is curled over like this. So just keep that in mind as we do these petals. All right, so that took us a little bit to get all those pinks on, but we're going to go through the next stages pretty quickly. I'm going to be using the mauve color, which is 61, and a tiny, tiny little bit of the purple, which is number 6. And I'm just going to go over all of the areas that are super dark in the pink. I'm just going to repeat those steps with these two pencils. I'm going to just alternate between the mauve and the purple, depending how dark I want to get. And depending how heavy my pink that I laid on already is, because if it's super heavy, I'll have a hard time layering on the mauve. So I'm just going to kind of alternate between these two and just go over the whole thing. Again, the darkest colors are going to be closest to the base. You don't really have to think too much during this step because you are going to be just going on top of the areas you've already gone darker. You're just going on top of those again with these darker colors. So you're just making your darks even darker. So you shouldn't have to think too much about where you're applying them because you're just going to be basically tracing where you've gone heavy with your pink color or your number 23. And it's really up to you at this point how much of the purples and mauves you even want to add. If you really like the flower just with pink, there's no reason you can't proceed on to the stage of wetting it, which we're going to be doing in a minute. I'm going to make sure I've got enough darks kind of in the area just surrounding the center of the flower because it tends to be quite shaded. I might even add a little bit more of my number 23 pink just to make sure that I'm happy with the amount of darkness without going overboard with the purple. Just going to add a little bit of darkness to our little bud here. And I'm using a combination of just circular motion as well as kind of a little bit more linear motion to go with the creases and the folds that I've already applied with the pink. Getting the purples a little bit darker in some of these spots here because that's where I'm seeing the most shadows happening. And if you notice any areas where you wish you hadn't gone so heavy with any certain color, like I'm wishing I hadn't gone as heavy with my purple here, a good time to fix it is before you wet it. You can just take a kneaded eraser and just gently lift it up. This is a kneadable eraser that just allows me to dab rather than rub, and you can see I've lifted that without completely obliterating it. And then I can come back in and add a little bit more pink because I think I want just a little bit more of the pink here, and the purple was starting to get overpowering. Why don't we go ahead and quickly do the leaves? And I'm just going to fill all of the leaf shapes in with my green, which is number 56. And with the green, I'm just going ahead with the same pressure everywhere and just filling these leaves in. I'm not worrying about details, veins, anything, just filling it in with this green. Now I'm going to go ahead and add our next green, which is number 5. I'm going to go a little bit darker towards the tips of the leaves and a little bit more towards the back of the leaf. You could add details to your veins, but I think in this case, I'm going to actually just simplify and maybe just draw the center vein. You can show which leaves are behind either the flower or some of the other leaves by darkening them where the edges meet. I'll demonstrate on this one because it's a good example of a leaf that's behind another leaf. I'm darkening where the edges are meeting, and then I'm going to just softly gradate or create a gradation outwards. I think what I'm going to do is skip number 38, which was our blue-green, and just go straight into the blues and purples because we're going to be blending these anyway, so if we skip a step, it'll work out okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and alternate with the blue and the purple, so that's number 3. The blue is 3, the purple is 6. And I'm just going to go in and kind of, again, darken where the edges meet, so the edge of the leaf against the petals here. Using the blue, then the purple, and I'm not putting that much, but just using these colors is helping to kind of just deepen the values a little bit. And the purple is helping to neutralize the green. And we're also creating a sense of depth. So sometimes what I'm doing is I'm placing more darkness on one side of the leaf than the other. I'm also creating a bit of darkness where there could be shadows being cast from either the flower, like the flower or the bud, or some of the leaves themselves. So let's go ahead and practice what we're doing on these little swatches that we already made. So that we get our technique kind of something we're comfortable with before we go right at it on our painting. So what I'm going to be doing a lot of today is dabbing my brush off on my paper towel because we want to be fairly dry or damp as we do this, especially if you're working on cardstock like I am. It's not quite as important if you're on real watercolor paper, but otherwise, yes, you want to keep fairly dry. So I'm going to start with coming into the yellow, and I'm going to start with the light side and kind of work my way into the dark side. And you can rub things around a little bit, but just be careful as you're rubbing that you don't go too extreme with things. If you feel like you're too dry, you can always just add a small drop of water onto your brush and just blend that just gently. I'm gonna just add a bit of water to kind of create a smooth gradation. So again, we start on the light side and then kind of drag ourselves over just gently. You have to be very respectful of the fact that these colors over here are very dark and can contrast and even make mud sometimes. The pink one won't be as likely to create mud, but the green ones will because we've got purple and that green in there. So I'll show you what you don't want to do. You don't want to do this right off the get-go because you'll end up, I had too much water there, but even if I had been a little bit drier, I ended up just kind of smearing that color and it just flattened out everything. All of the gradation of like from light to dark the changes in value and color that we were achieving. So instead, start on the light side. Oh, I'm too wet. I'm trying to avoid having a puddle happening as I go, and then just work your way into the dark. And if you even want to, you can practice on this gradation here. So I'm going to start in the lighter area and work my way to the dark area. And then you can decide how much of the dark you pull this way, because you can pull the dark. You just have to be doing it consciously. And I'm going to start in the light and come over to the dark. Because we talked about kind of the pushing, pulling, dragging, whatever, where you can kind of drag that darker color into your light area, or start light and then drag this in here. You just have to be conscious of the fact that we've got multiple colors going, and so we got to do that very gently. So let's do it on our painting. I'm just coming in with a quick note while I'm editing this. As I was watching myself apply water to this peony, I went, oh my goodness, I sure put a lot of water on there for saying that we should be working really dry. And the final result ended up a little bit more rippled than I would like. I don't know if you can see that very well on the video, but if you look at the back of this paper, you can see some rippling happening. So I went ahead and repeated the steps on this peony down here, and I worked with a drier brush. So after you watch me apply water to this peony, stick around for a few minutes longer and watch me add it to this one as well, because you're going to discover I put a lot less water the second time around, and I got a lot less rippling on the back of the page. So this is a situation of do what I say and not what I do. So hopefully watching the second peony will be helpful. I'm actually, as far as my brush here, I'm going to use the number 6 for this because it's the smaller one. You could even use smaller if you want, but that way I don't chance having struggles keeping myself neat and tidy because I'm using too big a brush. So this time I'm just going to kind of dot a little bit. I'm just kind of like going up and down a little bit as I come in here, and I'm doing the light area first, and then I'm working my way into the darker areas just by adding this water, just enough to make it blend. And you can continue kind of doing this dotting thing until you feel like it's blended or you've got enough water on there. And while that's drying, I'm going to move on to one of the petals. Maybe I won't do the one that's touching right now. Let's go over to one of these big petals and do it first, because it's a good place to practice our getting our water on and then just dragging into the darker pink. So as you can see, I started in the lights and I'm dragging the water into my darks. And then if I want to, I can drag some of those darks around. Here, I didn't want to touch the center of the flower against one of these petals because we could have made like kind of a weird in-between color, right? The yellow might have bled into the pink and vice versa. So sometimes you'll want to just, like if you just wet one shape, you'll want to skip and work on another shape. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of the pinks first, and then I'll come back and do the greens. If you like mixing your green and pink together a little bit, you can carefully do that. For now, I'm not going to do anything like that. I'm going to keep it simple and just get these shapes working first. That's really pretty, isn't that? I like how that one's looking. Again, starting in the lights. And you can kind of see how wet you are. If you feel like you're a little bit too puddly, just soak your brush up, like dry your brush a little bit and then carry on. It does look pretty when you have more water. You just have to be really careful because you'd end up with quite a bit of warping. Also remember that the wetter you are, the more likely, if you do one shape that's next to another one, the more likely they will bleed. If you're working fairly dry, that's less likely to happen. And you might be able to do several petals before you wash your brush, but just be aware that if you go too long before you wash your brush out, then you're going to just start smearing around the colors that are on your brush, and you won't actually be able to get those nice clean light colors. You're going to start losing your light. So do wash your brush, dry it, and then pick up where you left off. I'm just jumping around a little bit so that I don't end up mushing all of my shapes together. So I'll do one, and then I'll come back in a little bit and do the one next to it. I'm going to move over to the bud and then come back up over here once these dry a little bit more. You can see what's happening there. I'm dragging the pink almost too much up here, and I'm losing my white, so I'm washing my brush, and then I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna try and really lift out of here. I'm just gonna let it be, but I just know my brush needs to be washed because I'm not maintaining any whites there. I think you can kind of see the process, so I'm just going to go around and just finish this flower up, and then I will come back and do the leaves. And I'll be doing the same process with the leaves. I'm going to be starting with my lights first, and then dragging my water into the darks. And then I can decide how much of this darker color to drag back into the green. And again, I'm going to avoid doing leaves that are touching each other at the moment. Even though I'm pretty dry, I'd rather not take the risk. So lights, drag it into the dark. The beauty of this technique is that you can just work dry and get your work almost finished in colored pencils, and then just come in with water and just let all the colors mingle, and you can get some really beautiful effects, which can be a convenient way to do your art. You could do the dry session at a stage where you don't have access to your water and your paint, and then just come in after and add the water. Once you've gone ahead and wet everything, you might find some of your shapes have kind of lost their value or lost some of the detail that you had at the beginning. And what I would recommend doing is drying this thoroughly, and then after it's completely dry, you can always come in with a watercolor pencil again, add a few more details, and then very, very gently wet them again. I'll show you what I mean. Now I've thoroughly dried my painting, and I'm noticing one area that I left kind of white that I wish I had have done dark. So I'm going to come in here and just repeat the steps that we did for the petals and just darken this shape. When I look at my painting that I used as my reference here, I can see that I had a dark area in here, and so I'm going to just make it dark. Hopefully I'll be happy with that in the end. We'll see. But the paper is definitely more resilient when it's dry. You do not want to try and do this while your paper is damp, particularly if you're using cardstock. And then when you've got that shape on there, you can just go ahead and use your damp brush again. Just dab it off, make sure we're damp enough. I'm just going to drag that and just kind of blend that shape into this one. And in that case, I ended up really dragging the color upwards more than starting in my light area. That time I actually just dragged my darks up. But I gotta be careful I don't overwork, because that can happen. I might go ahead and deepen this shape right here in the bud. I feel like some of the shapes are kind of starting to fuse together. So I'm just gonna go ahead with my mauve color, which again, that's 61. And maybe a little bit, tiny little bit of purple. And then blend out. So I'm going to go in the light. I'm going to start with my light section first. Even though I've already wet this before, I'm going to just go in the lights and then drag myself into there and call that good. So really anywhere that you feel, as long as your paper's dry, anywhere you feel you would like to push the darks a little bit further, you can just go ahead with your colored pencils, color, and then wet. And then once it's wet, don't touch it. The other thing you can do is, if you have areas that you feel you want more texture, is you can just go ahead and add that texture in with your colored pencils, and then don't even bother wetting it. So for this center of this flower, I might just go ahead and add a little bit of texture with my watercolor pencils and just leave it like that. So I went ahead and colored this using the same steps that I did over here. And I'm going to try this time going over it again with water, but using less. So I'm definitely going to try and dab my brush off often, and let's see how I can do here. Do my little spotting thing that I did before, again, starting kind of in the lighter areas and then just working my way into the darker sections of the little center here. And then I will go ahead and start the petals. Let's do this nice big one. Start light and work my way into the dark. Now I'm still jumping around. I'm trying to kind of, do a shape, then skip a few shapes, do a shape, skip a shape, just so I don't get bleeding together, but I'm really hoping I'm getting lighter. I'm really trying, but I will say I thought I was not doing so bad before, and when I watched the video, I'm like, You're not practicing what you preach. And like I say then too, with the amount of rippling I got, I thought, I think I could have done better with that dry brush. I'll get my paper towel into view so that you can actually see my brush getting dabbed off, and you'll have an idea how much I'm dabbing my brush. Okay, I'm getting pretty pink. I'm also washing my brush off more because I'm using less water. I find that my brush is getting saturated with the pigment a lot faster. So something to keep in mind. You'll probably have to wash your brush more often as you do this with less water. I'm doing some shapes that are touching because I think I am staying dry enough that I can get away with it. But I'm always starting with my lights and working into the dark on each shape so that I maintain the whites as best as I can and then get into the darks. And I can always drag the darks out, but if I start with the darks, there's a chance that I will lose my whites. That's why I start with the lights and then try and work into the darks. And then I'm repeating these steps with my greens. And again, I'm hoping to stay drier than I did last time. I feel like I'm getting a little bit puddly right now, so I'll dab that off. The key is if you do have a lot of water on your brush and you're finding that you've got a puddle, I would suggest trying to soak it up sooner rather than later so that the water won't absorb into your paper, because that's where I had problems earlier when I was going a little too wet, and then by the time the water all absorbed into my paper, I was getting the ripples. So that's definitely a result of cheaper paper like cardstock. Yes, watercolor paper does ripple as well. It just doesn't tend to ripple as badly. And I find that watercolor paper can handle being ironed better. So that's another thing to keep in mind with using watercolor paper, is that even when it does ripple, you can iron it. And I think I've mentioned this before, but when I iron my watercolor paper, like a finished painting that is, I will sandwich it between paper towel before I iron it. And I find that actually works fairly well, especially with a painting that's not too large. There are ways to stretch your paper or tape your paper down. That's another option. I'm not really sure how the taping method would work on cardstock though. So any areas where I feel like I'm lifting too much of the pigment out, I can kind of drag it around a little bit. I just have to be careful because I'll lose my details and I might lose the depth, which, as you know, we can come back in and do another layer of paint or watercolor pencils if we needed to, but I'd prefer to be able to get it done in one coat. Or maybe I should say one pass. I don't really know that you call this a coat per se. It's not like a coat of paint. I feel like I could have put a little bit more of the purple and the blue into these leaves. They feel to me like they're a lot more lime green, but oh well. I think you can see the effects of having a drier brush. I'm hoping that it looks like there's less water puddling. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more watercolor pencil tutorials, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope this video has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, and that it has inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye.